So not too long ago, I saw a video talking about the various Spider-Man musicals. And whilst the list was fairly thorough, even mentioning the not actually a musical Rock Confessions of a Superhero album and the Spider-Man Rocks Jukebox musical put on by Universal, in the words of Master Yoda, there is another. And I almost guarantee you've never heard of it. And no, I'm not talking about Spider Man Turn Off the Dark. We all know that one. The amount of essays regurgitating the same thing, acting as if the disaster of the musical hasn't been thoroughly documented and shared, is absolutely insane. We're past that. No more Turn Off the Dark videos. Please, I beg you, stop. We know. I promise. Listen to me. I promise whatever you scripted it in your Google Doc, we've already heard of before. Nobody cares. No. Today, true believers, I bring you the truly forgotten Spider-Man musical, one that predates Turn Off the Dark and Spider-Man Rocks, one that only my Euro friends could possibly have heard of, one so obscure, no videos or images even exist online of it. I am talking about Spider-Man live on stage. Now you're probably saying, Multi, what's Spider-Man live on stage? I'm so glad you asked, inquisitive viewer. Spider-Man Live on Stage was a Spider-Man musical put on by Butlins, a family entertainment sort of resort. It is a resort in the UK. As far as I can tell, the musical started running in 1999 and ran until. When I said this musical is obscure, it's friggin' obscure. The only mention of it I can even find online is a Reddit post from like 2 years talking about how they couldn't find any images of it online. It's obscure. So that being said, you might be thinking there isn't much we can talk about, and you're partially right, but there is some media that has survived. The cast album is still floating on the internet. You can't download it as far as I can tell anywhere, or stream it legally anywhere. But you can still find physical copies of it on sale or for sale on eBay, which is where I got mine, and how I listened to the album. If you want to listen to it, though, online, there's a very small YouTube channel called Butlins Vault that uploaded the whole album 14 years ago. So you can listen to it there. Like I said, however, by this point, by the time I discovered that, had already gone the extra mile and bought the album for myself secondhand. And yeah, from what I gathered, the story revolves around Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man and stopping the Lizard's plot to turn everybody in the world into lizards. And that's really about it. Actually, to be honest, he's already Spider-Man at the start of the musical, from what I can tell. So, anyways, it's sort of hard to follow by the songs alone, but you get the general gist. But what's crazy is you don't really actually know who the main villain is until song 10 of 14, which is kind of like wild. So up until that point, it's kind of just a bunch of random songs about high school, with a few Spider-Man focused numbers kind of thrown in. Since we can't really talk about the sets or the costumes perhaps outside Spider-Man's, but we'll get to that. I'll go ahead and just break down each song and explain what's going on to the best of my abilities. And just for fun, I will compare them to Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark track for track as they are listed in the available album, not how they appear in the musical. Because again, we're consuming the Butlins musical through the album, not as a proper stage show. I also wanted to know if you're looking for more insight on this thing by reading the included CD booklet, as one might logically do, you'll be disappointed to find that there's virtually no information in there. You'll find the cast list, though who played what role is not denoted. And I've gone through half the cast list via Google search, and I found one, and that is the first name listed, and that is who played Peter Parker. You will find the credits for like the score, the lyrics, the book. I'm not sure. I'm not a big musical person, so I'm not sure what that refers to. I'm assuming the actual like dialogue and etc. Uh, but either way, they're written by the same person. There's like credits for other roles and other sort of things, but there's no lyrics. There's no images of the actual show or anything. It's just a single page of credits. So, anyways, I'll shut up and get to the actual musical. Track one, the press conference. So we start our story with Peter Parker actually have already becoming Spider-Man, and from what I can tell, he's sort of the hot topic around the state or city. All the press outlets seem to imply, though, he's also just like maybe a momentary flash in the pan, so to speak, that he'll kind of be forgotten in no time. We even get a moment where we do hear Spidey kind of fail to stop the robber backstage and Uncle Ben dying as a result of a carjacking, which I found interesting since the musical predates the release of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. And in the comics, Uncle Ben dies due to a home invasion, not a carjacking. So I'm kind of curious to see if the writer of the musical, David H. Bell, came up with that, or how he came up with that. This musical is officially okayed by Marvel, so I kind of wonder if it's possible that the team had access to information for the upcoming film, or if it was just like a coincidence. As far as I can tell, Sony was getting Spider-Man scripts in 1990 and hired Raimi to direct in 2000, so I'm just curious. And I don't really recall Ultimate Spider-Man enough and when that started to know if by that point Uncle Ben's death had been established in that universe via that, and that's what they were drawing from. I don't hold, you know what, I'll just look it up. Give me a second. Okay, so no, it's still a home invasion even in the Ultimate Universe. So yeah, I'd be curious to know and how that aspect came up with. Um Comparing the track one of Turn Off the Dark is a bit unfair, but technically both albums have the same amount of tracks, so that's kind of have to track for track. Turn Off the Dark's first track is an instrumental called New York Debut, which is fine. Some of the transitions that happen from melody to melody during it are a bit odd, but it's a pretty good track. Again, not super fair to compare the two, but honestly, I prefer the press conference. If you put a gun to my head and made me choose, I'm picking the press conference. Um, the press conference pulls kind of double duty, doing what Turn Off the Dark does in like its first two tracks in one. So, track two, Do It Now. Uncle Ben has died. We've established that, and now Peter kind of reflects on his inaction and what he should do with his powers. Starting with catching Uncle Ben's killer and avenging him. But ultimately, from the sounds of it, Peter still kind of elects to do nothing with them. I'm guessing what he does is find Uncle Ben's killer, and then is sort of at a loss, since in the song it is stated, I believe more than once, "I just want to go home." So from the sound of it, that's the only thing he does, kind of maybe during this number, but still has not accepted the role of being a superhero by any stretch of the imagination by the end of the song. Contrast this to Turn Off the Dark, second track, Boy Falls from the Sky, which honestly, again, I'm going to give it to Spider-Man live on stage. Do It Now is just a better song, and it clearly pushes the narrative forward. Now, I will be honest, I have not seen either version of Turn Off the Dark. I know they're bad in both plot lines. So I've had no real desire to watch them, especially after listening to the soundtrack first. As I understand, the soundtrack is also out of order, which I believe since when I listened to it the first time, I could hardly follow I couldn't really follow what was going on. And listen, musical soundtracks don't have to do that, but I feel like a good musical will do that. For example, I listened to Tick Tick Boom before I watched the movie, and I could easily follow the story of Jonathan Larson uh, just through the soundtrack. That kind of when I watched the movie, yeah, maybe some things I envisioned wrong, but on the whole, I actually got most of it right. And if we're using that logic, so far, this music from 1999 is doing it better and it actually sounds like a musical. So, anyway, moving on. Track 3, A New Start. The song talks about Midtown High. Nothing particularly special, it just sort of talks about a new year, a new start. Just kind of plays on the theme of like another year in high school and sort of like the vibe that kind of brings and sort of some of the feelings that trickle up at the start of a new year in high school. Um, it does end with a really horrible cheerleading cheer sort of bit. And for some reason, the Midtown High mascot is the Eagles in this universe. I'd imagine the logic was America, but it does feel odd. And from what I can tell, the real life mascot for Midtown High is, or their sports team is the Knights. In the comics, the mascot or the team seems to be the Tigers, consistently. So yeah, real odd choice. It's the only logic I can think of for why you would make that decision. Turn Off the Dark's third track is the far superior Rise Above One, which basically does the job of what track two of Spider-Man on stage or live on stage already did. So you look at it with that context, yeah, track 3 kind of sucks for the 1999 musical, especially compared to Turn Off the Dark. Track 3 here really does feel like filler, where in the case of Turn Off the Dark, it feels like a vital piece of the musical. Track 4 of Spider-Man live on stage live, can never remember which one it is Hotdish. It is an interesting song. From what I can tell, the word Hotdish in the song is being used as a stand-in for gossip or news, whilst playing on the sort of common school lunch of tater tot hot dish. I don't know how common that is. It was very common for me growing up, so I'm assuming that's where this is coming from. About midway through the song, Peter kind of reflects on how he's been as a person, um, and now his reflection is more of like as a student and a person, much less about how he's kind of been using his powers. He comes to the conclusion though that yes, he's going to use his powers for good. Quoting quote, "This time Spider-Man will act, fulfill my responsibility." There's also a sort of subplot about broadcasting something to get eyes on Midtown High, but I can't quite grasp what that's about. I get the impression that this is taking place around Homecoming. That does get kind of established, and that this broadcast is going to be happening on Homecoming. The performance aspect is kind of vague on what that is, but by the end, it seems to be like a musical kind of ensemble number, from what I can tell. But as of like listening it from this point, it's a little kind of vague and confusing. Picture This is track 4 on Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark soundtrack. And I mean, it's not bad, but it does seem to have the same issue as a lot of the Turn Off the Dark songs, in that without context of the musical behind them, they just kind of feel random. In that regard, I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but I think Hot Dish weirdly is a better song. It certainly feels more at home for a musical, being mostly an ensemble number. Which does also forward Peter's story by him sort of deciding to use his powers for good and seemingly the underlying through the context of like the underlying message of let's get eyes on Midtown High and kind of show them what we can do and sort of I don't know, to be something worth being proud of, being a good example. um so I think that's kind of partly playing into his motivation there during the musical through that is he kind of determines, yeah, everybody else wants to put their best foot forward and sort of represent Midtown High in a good way, and I should do the same with my powers. That's kind of the vibe I got. Regardless, picture this just seems to be a bit of random. It sounds like it's playing off the idea of Peter seeing MJ for who she is, but it's kind of like barely seems to be reflected in the song. It just seems more like he's a photographer. We need a song about him taking pictures, uh, like he does in the movie. And there we go. We have picture this. It just, yeah, it definitely feels like a filler song, but does kind of seem to set up the romance between Peter and MJ, which is interesting because that listening in hindsight now. Bear in mind, I scripted this as I was listening to it, but now as I'm recording it, in hindsight, um, Turn Off the Dark feels much more like a love story, which I guess the first Spider-Man film kind of was, but it kind of really seems to take that in a way and try and make that the focal point. But so in that regard, picture this works. But through the context of just listening to the soundtrack and what we're being fed, it does feel, like I said, kind of random and almost out of place, and really just feels kind of like, well, he's a photographer, he does photography in the movie, we need a musical number for this kind of scene, this purpose. So I don't know, I don't love it. Um, Track 5 is Stop the Presses, and it's all about Spider-Man, the good or bad that he's doing for the city. Ultimately, the big thing that's being sort of expressed in this song is that he's selling papers. Some people are on his side, some aren't. The papers are kind of being wishy-washy about their sort of feelings on him. Some are spreading rumors. The song even introduces, or seems to introduce, JJ, though he doesn't have like any singing parts or anything, but he just has like a brief kind of mention. Um, Overall, though, this song is the perfect kind of embodiment of Spider-Man's relationship with the press. Uh, and the chorus of this number is incredible. It is the same as the opening number, which is also really cool. So it kind of feeds throughout the musical, at least so far. I really, really love the piano melody that plays throughout this entire track. Over in Turn Off the Darkland, track 5 is called Just Can't Walk Away. Um, Say It Now, which seems to be a song about Peter not expressing how he feels about MJ, but not being able to just walk away from her, and sort of the same being applied for her, at least in the terms of not being able just to like forget him and kind of move on. If I'm being honest, Stop the Presses is better. It's a lot more catchy. By this point, if we're just comparing stories and just again just through the soundtrack, um, Stop the Presses feels just, or the whole, well, actually the whole musical feels way more focused than Turn Off the Dark. I'm sure Turn Off the Dark has like an actual longer runtime, but in terms of we're just going off of the soundtrack, and then I don't know, I think averaging about the same, probably not actually, but as far as I can tell, Spider-Man live or whatever It just feels more focused. Um, Especially once we're like 5 tracks deep. Turn Off the Dark. We aren't even sure if Spider-Man like is Spider-Man. I guess presumably the lyrics of Rise Above One implies that he is. I mean, he certainly has his powers, but he hasn't established that he's gonna necessarily do anything with them. Because Rise Above One is very much like being unable to move forward and live up to the responsibility. That's what it seems to be implied. So, yeah. Um, so the past 2 tracks have seemed to be more focused again on the romance with MJ, um, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's kind of unexpected. It's just yeah, like I said, Spider-Man live on stage live feels like I said, 5 tracks deep feels very more focused, and like I said, Stop the Presses is a lot catchier of a song, and feeds again into, if we're just viewing it through or consuming it through the context of a soundtrack, it works better. It works better. Track 6, Heroes. This song is a solo by Peter, reflecting on his growth, but also second guessing whether or not he's actually cut out to be a hero, kind of wanting to give up being Spider-Man. He talks about what it means to be a hero and what happens if he does give up on being Spider-Man. But also he does kind of mention that he wants to find out who he, sort of Peter Parker, is. Right now, it's very obvious that he views himself and Spider-Man as 2 different entities, sort of in conflict. Number 6 of Turn Off the Dark is Bouncing Off the Walls, in a sort of clear indicator that the album is not in a proper order, as it clearly takes place during the moment of Peter kind of discovering his powers. So in terms of, if you're just experiencing again these musicals through the soundtracks, it's a terrible 6th song. It's awful. Compared to the overall quality, Bouncing Off the Walls is sung by Bono and feels more like a traditional U2 rock song, which most of Turn Off the Dark kind of feels like anyways, versus Heroes from Spider-Man on Stage, which feels in line for what you'd expect from a musical number dealing with this particular theme. I think in a vacuum, sure, Bouncing Off the Walls is better, but I think in terms of a song for a musical, and again within these confines and these parameters, Spider-Man on Stage's 6th number is just it's better. So yeah. Sorry for my clicking here. Track 7 is intricate interact. I'm not sure how that's supposed to be pronounced. Which, from what I can tell, just an intermission jingle. So compared to track 7 of Turn Off the Dark, which is Pull the Trigger, which is a proper like musical number, you can kind of guess which is better. They might, but I mean, Pull the Trigger does feel like a bit of like a lull sort of thing, but it is like a proper musical number. So Turn Off the Dark does get the point here. Track 8 is On Friday Night, and is about homecoming night. And from what I can gather, again, is being sort of broadcast to the world, and the school is doing some sort of musical performance. From the sounds of it, the performance is sort of meant to bring some sort of change to the world. I don't know, very hard to tell, but it is, from the sounds of it, supposed to be this big, inspiring thing that Midtown High wants to do to sort of better the world. Meanwhile, over in Turn Off the Dark universe, we have No More, a melancholy number about Peter wanting to be anybody but himself. The song, like Bouncing Off the Walls, kind of feels out of place in track order, and maybe it's not, but it does kind of feel like it. It also touches on MJ's home life too. I think, well, yes, On Friday Night forwards the story better via the soundtrack. No More is objectively a better song, and probably one of the few songs from Turn Off the Dark that actually sounds like a traditional like musical song. So yeah, I'll give it to Turn Off the Dark here, even if this song kind of maybe feels out of place within the track listing. Um, Track number 9 for Spider-Man on Stage is Heroes Reprise. A bit of a shorter solo for Peter, kind of finally accepting the role of Spider-Man and cementing that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are not separate entities. They are one and the same. Conversely, track 9 for Turn Off the Dark is DIY World. Easily one of the best songs for the Turn Off the Dark musical. It is about the creation of the supervillains, specifically the Sinister Six in this universe. Is also easily this is easily one of the most musical sounding songs, from kind of the harmonies to the instrumentation to the rhythm of sort of the words and how they're sung. Heroes Reprise, by comparison, isn't bad, and again pushes the narrative of the musical, but so does DIY World too, and it's longer, and I think it is just like an overall better song. So in regards in terms of track 9 versus track 9, Turn Off the Dark does do it better, even if it sort of again feeds into this sort of discombobulation that the feels like you're kind of going through while listening to the Turn Off the Dark musical. Mm. Track 10 for Spider-Man on Stage, live on stage, is Better. This track finally introduces us, at least to us audio enjoyer onlys, to the villain of our story, the Lizard, or as he's later referred to as Dr. Lizard. This song thematically is the same idea as Turn Off the Dark's previous track. It's a fun one. Doc Lizard talks about turning the whole planet into lizards on Friday night, and the idea is of making them better. So, borrowing story elements from the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, ironically, and I would imagine, and sort of Lizard's general idea. I mean, maybe they got it from the '90s cartoon. I don't know if in Lizard's original comic appearance, if that was the plan, if it was like an altruistic turning people of lizards or more of like a spiteful decision. I know in the '90s show it is a decision that he thinks is for the betterment of the planet, so I kind of wonder if that's where they got that from or not. Returning to Turn Off the Dark, we have If the World Should End. It's a solo number by MJ. It's a love song about how if the world should end, presumably at the hands of the Sinister Six, she'll still have her love for Peter Parker or Spider-Man. Unsure who. Of the two tracks, I think I prefer Better. But If the World Should End isn't a bad song. But maybe unnecessary. It's hard to say within the confines of listening to the audio only, and the tracks kind of being out of order makes it feel very superfluous. It doesn't forward the narrative at all, and it doesn't really tell us anything we didn't already know. You could pluck this song out of the Turn Off the Dark album, and the album would still work. Honestly, it might work better. Within the confines of the actual musical, I'm sure it makes a lot more sense to give MJ a solo number. I mean, Spider-Man Rocks came to the same conclusion, and that musical is only 30 minutes. And tells basically the same story as Turn Off the Dark. But again, within the confines of ingesting the musicals through just the audio, I think it's a better song for the 10th track. Again, I think if you maybe go into Turn Off the Dark with the premise of that the story is really a love story first and foremost, this song, If the World Should End, works better. But again, its placement in the track listing still feels a little weird, a little off to me. So, yeah. Track 11, Thank You, Spider-Man, is the second longest track of the album. It's, I think, about 4 minutes and 1 second. And it's what you would expect. It's a solo number from MJ thanking Spider-Man for all that he does, but also features a bit of dialogue between her and Spidey, giving us an explanation of what's going on at this point in the musical, which is nice. In the exchange, we learn that Spider-Man seemingly has just successfully saved MJ and fought off from the lizard and then kind of fought the lizard off and they've disappeared. MJ reveals that he had said something about Friday night. And we also learn here that his official name in this musical is Dr. Lizard and that he intends to use something called Joy Juice to transform everybody. Um, Whilst not as strong as MJ's kind of solo number from Turn Off the Dark, once again, within this experience, or within the confines of experiencing these musicals simply through their soundtracks, um, this works better as an MJ solo number to me than the previous one from Turn Off the Dark of If the World Should End. It kind of forwards the plot a little more, but it is interesting how track 10 of Turn Off the Dark is an MJ solo number sort of about her love for Spider-Man, and track 11 of Spider-Man on stage live is very much the same kind of thing, only without the love element, but a clear admiration element. But less of a commitment to. There's no like clear love commitment there. Anyways, that's interesting. So, Turn Off the Dark's 11th track though is Sinisterio. Just by listening to it, it's a little hard to tell what's going on or when this song is supposed to be taking place timeline wise. It's not a bad number, but it's certainly forgettable. As a recording this, I can't even remember what it sounds like. I think it works for the listening experience of the album, for coming off of If the World Should End, but I can promise you that it doesn't necessarily lead well into the next song. So of the two, Thank You Spider-Man is more effective storytelling. It works better within this I don't know, confines. Track 12 of the Spider-Man on Stage is Shine Your Light. This is clearly the closing number after Spider-Man has saved Homecoming from Dr. Lizard. Pretty sure this is the longest track on the album at 4 minutes and 10 seconds, though like barely. Basically, the theme of the song is be yourself, shine your light, because doing so will help others. I believe this song is intended to be the performance we've been hearing about Midtown kind of wanting to do. It's a fun song. It gives Disney's Hercules vibes, especially the ending song of that movie, or one of the first songs of that movie. It's a reprise. It just has a lot of similarities, and it feels very, very the same. It feels very white person gospel. So it's not nearly as good as the aforementioned Hercules number, but it's okay. It's not particularly offensive or anything. I believe the lead part of the song is being sung by Peter, but it is kind of hard to tell. For Turn Off the Dark, though, we have the infinitely better Freak Like Me. That being said, the song feels very out of place. It feels like it should have come sooner in the track listing, so it's a bit odd. But objectively, it is a better song. It's more catchy. It's more memorable. With definitely stronger vocal performance. It is not a great 12th out of 14 track listing, but is objectively a good song and a better song. If we're going pound for pound. Track 13 of Spider-Man on Stage is Shine Your Light Reprise, which hardly is a song, but it's like this cool 30-second jingle that puts the chorus melody of Stop the Presses over the instrumentation of Shine Your Light, more or less. It's kind of hard to tell when exactly this is played out in the show, but I would imagine it's just before the very, very end. Must have been some sort of story segment after the first Shine Your Light, where maybe we see Spidey like one last time kind of swing off, and this is kind of like the send-off for him of like, Spider-Man, our hero. So it is kind of cool within that confine. Contrasting this with track 13 of Turn Off the Dark's Rise Above 2, which is objectively a better song. Um, it is interesting that both 13th tracks are reprises of earlier kind of numbers. Rise Above 2 is sort of a rework of the first about Peter not being able to live up to Uncle Ben's kind of famous last words or whatever, famous motto. But in the second number, we have Arachne, MJ, and seemingly the city telling him that, like, no, you can and you will. And the sort of, and this is what kind of inspires Peter to rise above. The song does not feel like it's supposed to come off the back of Freak Like Me. I could be wrong, but it just almost seems more like it's intended to be a little bit sooner. Like Freak After Me, like, yes, after Freak Like Me, but not directly after it. It feels more like it's supposed to follow up Sinisterio, which feels like it should have been like a later song towards the climax. Track 14 of Spider-Man on Stage really isn't a track at all. It's Curtain Call Hotdish Reprise. It's just a little over a minute long and it's just kind of feels a bit odd for it to be included, but does mix the opening number slightly, which is kind of neat. It mixes that in, which is kind of neat. But yeah, it didn't need to be here. It is not the strongest number to end the album on, like I said, especially if you're like just experiencing it through the album. The final track of Turn Off the Dark, by comparison, is a stronger end and objectively a much better song, and that song is Turn Off the Dark, the title track. It is a solo number by the character of Arachne. Sonically, it's a good follow-up to Rise Above 2, but in terms of narrative, for me, it feels like an odd number to end on. It feels like in the actual musical, it should have come much earlier, like maybe after Peter initially gets bitten, which is when I think it actually does occur, but I could be wrong. Like I said, it's objectively a better song, but that's also not really saying much. I also wonder, because I know there's two versions of Turn Off the Dark. And I almost wonder if, given the lyrics, if it was removed for later versions of the musical, because it does sort of talk about Arachne sort of intentionally picking Peter and granting him powers, which I recall was an element of the musical that was dialed back for the second version of the musical. And I thought maybe they had it's so I don't know. I haven't seen the musical, so I'm not sure. Like I said, it's not a bad song, but it does feel like a terrible song to end on because it is very melancholy and yeah, it just doesn't feel like the song you're supposed to end the musical on. Feels again like it should have been one of the very, very early songs in terms of like what we're being told through the lyrics of the song. All right, that's all the tracks. That did take me a lot longer than I expected. As a musical, I actually kind of enjoy Spider-Man on Stage, especially compared to the other ones in terms of like just the songs. Um, yeah, I think it's easily my favorite of the three. Spider-Man Rocks, being a jukebox musical, it's not horrible. But A, there's no cast recording of it, and B, it is just a bunch of cover songs, uh, without the context of like what's going on in the actual stage performance. It's just crappier versions of those songs. Turn Off the Dark has much better vocal performances, but nearly all the songs are written like just U2 songs. So it kind of feels like it's at war with itself the entire time. And in terms of just the album, songs are out of place. You can't really follow the story just by listening to it alone. I guess you can get the general gist of what happened by the end, but you can't follow along moment to moment, beat to beat. It's kind of like in hindsight, you kind of look back on it and you're like, oh, so this is what happened. You're not kind of going through discovering the story and listening to the story and sort of being taken along for the journey. Um, and when you strip everything down to just the music, which is sort of the core element of a musical, Spider-Man on stage, crazily enough, is the best musical without question. Uh, if we want to take into account visuals, then sure, maybe it would be like number two, but it's certainly not number three. And I think if we're going to start accounting visual production values and things, you also then need to start accounting for time period as well. We don't have photographs or videos of the musical. The closest I found is the cover of a promotional sort of brochure for Butlins that does feature Spider-Man on the cover. And the cover states it's for the year 1999 to 2000, but Spider-Man is wearing his Universal duds, which is not a bad looking suit. That being said, a Reddit user who since deleted their account also found these two very small, very low res images, which do give us a better look at the suit. And it's actually a very different suit than what we see on the brochure. But it doesn't look bad to me at all. It's certainly better than the Spider-Man rock suit. But from these few images, it doesn't. Yeah, it does appear that the sets were probably simpler than Spider-Man rocks. And that the other costumes probably were a lot more cheap looking, but it's really hard to tell from just these two images. And I mean, it likely, let's be honest, the production value probably wasn't that high. But that being said, there clearly was a lot of effort put into this thing, at least in terms of the music elements. And I mean, like I said, from what we can tell, the Spider-Man suit does not look bad. But for now, that's all that can really be said about this thing. I've searched what I can to find out what I could and came up with practically kind of nothing. It is a little hard to believe there's zero footage of this thing at all, but I mean, it's definitely possible. The show started running in '99, and if it only ran for like, a couple years, I mean, it's possible that there isn't any remaining sort of media of it. But maybe if this video gets shared around and more attention is brought to this kind of forgotten musical, more things will just crop up. Until then, that's all for me, true believers. I think the music rights for this thing are probably in limbo. So if or when I can get my hand on a external CD drive, I'll rip my CD and kind of throw it up for you guys to listen to or download whenever you want. It was released by Varios Music Entertainment, and when I googled them, nothing kind of came up. So I'd imagine they've been defunct for a while now. So I don't think anybody's gonna come after me if I do put it up for you guys. If you enjoyed this deep dive into this musical you probably didn't know about, maybe consider subscribing, interacting with this video. I promise you, this was a lot more work than I intended, and my ego wants the recognition of being the first Spidey tuber to talk about this. So, please, thank you, and bye-bye.